ancient world, under Roman occupation, at least this is the working theory among historians and biblical scholars, a Roman foot soldier could force you to carry his pack for 1 mile. That was the rule. A single mile and not a step more. Since my feet don't come with odometers, I'm not sure how this rule was actually measured, but that is the rule. They couldn't force you to carry it any further. I've always loved the image of a Roman soldier running after some determined grandfather who will not relinquish the pack, begging and cajoling to please drop the pack, though I imagine that things could easily turn violent. Some scholars take this reading to suggest that when Jesus tells us to turn the cheek and carry the pack further, it is in order to be treated as equals. A backhand slap hits the right cheek of a child. A turn cheek forces the forehand punch of equals, they suggest. It's a compelling read, making power see the marginalized as equal. And yet, I wonder if this really isn't just about exposing power, not forcing power's hand, but about how too often power abuses the very rules power establishes to provide protection, with the results that the vulnerable are endangered. You know, this is precisely what the cross does. According to the Lutheran theologian Gerhard Forde, he says it exposes the depth of our terribleness and the even deeper love of God. Speaking of terribleness, David is a thug, a bully. I have no idea how that cute young shepherd boy anointed by Samuel, or how the man who will be king and who will dance the Ark of the Covenant into God's chosen city is also the person from today's reading. Here he is marauding among the countryside with his gang, sometimes fleeing the murderous Saul, but mostly just threatening wealthy landowners for protection. Nabal, as his name tells us, is apparently a fool. Does he really not know who David is? David, the feller of giants. David, the one who has killed 10,000 Philistines and 100 more just to gain the hand of the daughter of the king. Or does Nabal really not believe that someone with that brutal of a record is a real threat? Or does he simply have as little regard for the people under his care as David does? Abigail and her people are caught in the middle of two powerful men who are supposed to be protectors of wives and children and servants and flocks and soldiers, but who give little care for these things when their egos are bruised. Abigail acts, subverting her husband and allying with the would-be king. And her action exposes both men in their reckless regard for the vulnerable who rely on them. Only one heeds her advice. Abigail cautions David against incurring blood guilt, against justifying loss of life as collateral damage, against responding with a shrug. It's wise advice. God may be a distant character in this story, but God is consistent in his abiding care for the vulnerable. It is an easy thing, that careless shrug. We've seen it on a global scale. Russia invades Ukraine and East Africa starves. Psychologist Dr. Keltner from UC Berkeley calls this the power paradox. Keltner observes that while people usually gain power through traits and actions that advance the interest of others, such as empathy, collaboration, openness, fairness, and sharing, when they start to feel powerful or enjoy a position of privilege, those qualities begin to fade. The powerful are more likely than other people to engage in rude, selfish, and unethical behavior, he says. I ran into Keltner's work on empathy at an unforgettable piece in the Christian Century about Daniel Prude, who died on the street, pinned in police custody, confused, naked and cold, and no one ever got him a blanket. Peter Marty wrote, "People with power don't lack the capacity for empathy. They just typically insulate themselves from people they deem inconvenient." A careless shrug. The problem, of course, is that we are all guilty of that shrug. I mean, I certainly am. Abigail could have gotten on her donkey and rode the other way, and she might have been wise to, and we probably would have cheered her on her way. Run home, or run to the neighboring farm, or run to Saul to tell him, hey, David's right here. But she instead stood toe-to-toe with powerful men and exposed them in their ruthlessness. The cross is the same exposure. Gerhard Freude says that we put God on the cross in order to expose God, because we don't believe that God is what God says. That God can't possibly be forgiving, can't be merciful, and can't, because quite frankly, we don't know anyone who claims to be all-powerful, who would ever be gracious, merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. And so we seek to expose God, but when we do, God exposes us, just how low and despicable we can be, and then God is merciful anyway. Freude says, it is when we are caught in the act that we are caught by the act. It is when we are honest about just how apathetic and abusive we can be to one another that God's mercy and love can overflow into our lives and we can be transformed. How then shall we live, beloved? It is a vulnerable and uncomfortable thing to be revealed in this way. Over in Corinth, the great church experiment is underway. How is it that a bunch of rot-gut sinners from every walk of life, in a town known for its sexual immorality, how could they live together? This is one of those really hard passages of Paul. In one moment, it lifts women to heights equal to men, and the next, it isn't too difficult to see how Paul's instruction could hide and justify abuse. The whole passage has an air of, the men are talking, sweetheart. But the late Christer Stendahl, once Bishop of Stockholm and before that Dean of Harvard Divinity School, points out that Paul's letters, and particularly the Corinthian correspondence, advocate for love rather than integrity. He writes, integrity is the issue when people with different views and different convictions and different gifts must live together. The trouble is, things get messy. And an appeal to integrity is like, it's an appeal to rules. And an appeal to rules must be investigated with the question, who benefits from this? And when I appeal to the rules, I'm the one who benefits. Power benefits. But as Stendahl says, love allows for the full respect of the integrity of the other and overcomes the divisiveness of my zeal for having it my way in the name of my own integrity. It's not that we shouldn't act with integrity. It is that there is still a more glorious way, which Paul, in a few chapters in that beautiful poem about love, will name it as love. Not love as a feeling or something we pursue, but love as something we practice in a messy community. The author Toni Morrison calls love a diploma. In her novel Paradise, she writes, "You can only earn by practice and careful contemplations the right to express it, and you have to learn how to accept it." Jesus' cheek-turning, second-mile walking, coat and cloak giving is an exercise plan. It's the calisthenics of love, preparing us for the constant self-giving courage that characterizes love in the kingdom. And so, beloved, let us practice this kind of love. Love that speaks out loud, love that reveals brokenness and abuse, and love that always practices mercy. Amen.